Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm your host, Alleyne, covering for Darren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you are asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussion providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests will provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected with us as the Social Justice Forum starts now. Welcome back. New York City schools are recognizing the importance of social emotional learning, commonly referred to as SEL. This approach is known to foster healthy behaviors and cultivate safer school environments with a track record of positive outcomes for students, educators, and the community as a whole. CEO of the Urban Assembly, David Adams, joins me to explore how this approach could have more of a significant impact on young men in our communities. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Kimna, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Now, I had the pleasure of learning a little bit more about the Urban Assembly a few weeks ago. But for those who are unaware, can you actually just tell us what the Urban Assembly is and some of the work that you do?
Absolutely. So, the Urban Assembly is a school solutions organization. We're a nonprofit that designs schools. So, we have 22 schools that hold the Urban Assembly name here in New York City. We also design and scale solutions that support schools across the country. So, we have three areas that we support: social and emotional development, post secondary readiness and access, and high quality academics. And our goal is to advance the economic and social mobility of young people by improving public education.
Now, as CEO, can you just kind of talk a little bit about how this journey began for you? And I'm going to bring it up later on in the interview about like the importance of like just the position that you hold. But can you talk about how that journey started for you?
Absolutely. So I've been CEO of the Urban Assembly for about 2.5 years. My predecessor was Kristen Kearns Jordan, and her predecessor was Richard Kahn. And very proud to serve as third CEO of the Urban Assembly. Prior to this position, I was the Senior Director of Strategy for about a year. And prior to that position, I was the Director of Social and Emotional Learning. Um, as I've moved in my leadership of the Urban Assembly, we've focused our work on developing generalizable and scalable tools and solutions to improve educational outcomes for students across the country.
Now, you also sit on the board of directors of Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Can you talk about that specific experience? And I understand that it's kind of mainly focused on SEL. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I sure can. The Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, otherwise known as CASEL, is based in Chicago, Illinois, and they are the organization that actually developed the concept of social and emotional learning. Um, the the work that CASEL has done has really three distinct prongs. One is practice, one is policy, and one is research. So when you think about the work of social and emotional learning, you tend to think about the research that demonstrates its effectiveness in populations across the country. And that's one of the things that CASEL has done is create outstanding research to really ground our field and ensuring that we know what works and why. Now, let's go to the practice side of what CASEL does. CASEL has launched two main practice prongs, and one is called the Collaborating States Initiative. And that the work that they did is that we actually help states develop guidelines and social and emotional learning standards so that cities, jurisdictions, local jurisdictions could use those standards to promote social and emotional learning in their schools. And we did that across, I think, about 34 states, which is an amazing achievement. And then lastly, we talk about practice. And that's, excuse me, policy. And that work has happened to ensure that, for example, in the federal stimulus funds, social and emotional learning is written into those funds to ensure that schools can use those funds to support the social and emotional outcomes of their students and students in the future.
Now, how do both of these organizations, and you can choose one to focus on if you like, but how do these organizations prioritize emotional intelligence in students, but especially in young men? And I understand, like, for today, like, we want to really focus on the importance of that for a lot of young men in our community. So, can you expand on that?
Sure. So, Kim, when we think about social and emotional learning, we really think about two kinds of competencies. interpersonal competencies. So these are competencies that support our ability to interact with other people, things like relationship skills, things like social awareness, the ability to identify social cues, the ability to understand and take perspective of other people. And those are your interpersonal skills. Then you have your intrapersonal skills. And those are skills that are focused on understanding and having awareness of ourselves. Those are skills like emotional identification, self regulation. And those skills really map on very closely to what we think about as emotional intelligence, right? In the emotional intelligence space, and I co wrote a book, The Educator's Practical Guide to Emotional Intelligence. We talk about the ability to map, move, and match emotional information to the situation that we are in and the outcome that we're trying to achieve. Now, let's or place that onto the question of what does this mean for young men? We know, for example, that the data around young men demonstrates that, for example, about 80% of students classified as emotionally handicapped, emotionally disturbed in special education are boys. When we look at outcomes like prison or being involved in the criminal justice system, about 90% of those folks are boys. And so when we think about the work we do for social and emotional learning, what we want to do is we want to promote and equip all of our students to be successful in problem solving with themselves and others. And when we apply that to our young men in specific, we know that the better we do at promoting the social and emotional competencies of our young men, the stronger our communities will be, the stronger relationships will be, and the stronger our young men will be in terms of being able to solve problems in the community and other places.
And there's also an effort to start with school age children. So, why is it so important to start with elementary and even middle school students? And do you do any work with high school students?
Great question. So, in fact, most of our work here at the Urban Assembly is with high school students. We do have 22 schools, and these Urban Assembly schools are in three boroughs in Manhattan, in Bronx, and in Brooklyn. And the work of social and emotional learning in Urban Assembly has inspired folks from across the country, in fact, across the world, to invest in the social and emotional development of their kids. And so when we talk about early, middle, and high school students, we talk about a developmental trajectory that integrates these skills across time. And so in elementary school, you might be thinking about making sure that students have the ability to identify their emotions and do simple social tasks like share effectively, communicate their feelings. In middle school, we're going to start to think about how goal setting and more complex emotional tasks like being able to label effectively one's emotion and how it changes over time in response to a situation. By high school, you're really thinking about complex problem solving. We're mapping emotional and social skills to things like employability, to things like civic readiness. We're ensuring that high school students have the ability to resolve conflicts effectively using constructive approaches to that. We're making sure that we can set and achieve goals, that we can manage our emotions effectively, and we can identify social cues in ourselves and others. So, as the developmental trajectory increases in terms of age, the complexity of the skills that we teach increase, and the application of these skills is less about can I do this in the classroom, and more about can I do this in my life? Can I do this in the community? Can I do this on the job? And that's how we think about that spectrum between elementary, middle, and high school for our social emotional learning work.
Now, how could looking at race, gender, and even economic status help in assisting young black and brown boys and girls with SEL?
That's another great question. So the great news is that a recent meta-analysis, and the meta-analysis is a collection of multiple studies. And what happens in the meta-analysis is you look at all the research and you try to see what is the general trend of what we know about a field. And the most recent meta-analysis that was conducted on social and emotional learning was done by Dr. Christina Cipriano at Yale University. She led that work. And one of the key outcomes of that is that social and emotional skills work, and social and emotional learning works for students regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of rural versus urban versus suburban, even regardless of country. So these skills are foundational and fundamental skills across the spectrum and across demographics. Now, the one thing that is helpful to understand here is that students with a higher risk profile tend to actually make greater gains with universal social and emotional learning programs. So that means that if you have a higher risk factor, you come from a high risk background, and you are exposed to high quality social and emotional learning alongside everyone else, those students actually make higher gains quicker than students with lower risk profile. So I'm here to say that the work of SCL is for everyone. And as we apply these skills, students benefit in different ways. And the students with the highest risk do the best, have the most gains. And that means that when we do the work, we need to do it for everybody all the time.
Now, I'm curious to know, are there any challenges, especially when you are working with students maybe from high risk backgrounds, where being emotional or showing any type of feeling could be considered a negative thing, especially when we're talking about young boys who may have challenges with expressing how they feel, and may use other outlets to kind of express how they feel? Are there any challenges when you're trying to teach them SEL?
Well, I got two young sons, Elijah and Isaiah, and I got to let you know that I practice what I preach. My job as a father is to raise sons who know how to constructively solve problems, how to communicate effectively, and to be part of a community or group. So when we think about what does it take to do that, we need to understand that these are skills that allow everybody to be more successful. When I teach my sons how to communicate their needs and feelings effectively, it means that I can respond to them in more constructive ways. The difference between throwing a controller on the ground and taking a breath is the difference between a young person who knows how to manage their emotions and a young person who's on a path of higher risk. So while it is sometimes challenging to teach young men, in particular, the power of communication and the power of being able to be clear and expressive with how you're feeling and how that is impacting what you're trying to accomplish, we know that when we do that well, these young men are on a better path and a better trajectory to success.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up kind of like a personal experience for that question, because my next question was basically going to be talking about visibility, and how has your visibility as a successful Black man impact the work that you do with other young Black boys and young men?
That's a great question. There are times when I give speeches and a young Black man or even a middle-aged Black man will come up to me and said, uh, the fact that you are here, the fact that you are speaking the way that you're speaking about the things that you are speaking about, has inspired me to go back and do work for myself and to uplift others. And so for me, I feel a responsibility to live up to the expectations and to live up to the folks who delivered me and delivered our community. And that means that I seek to pursue excellence for myself, I seek to pursue excellence for my organization, and I seek to pursue excellence in our schools. And I think when we all understand that we are a product of the sacrifices of those who delivered us, we take that responsibility and we turn it into impact. And that's what I hope to do with my life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, how do you ensure children, all children, because we mentioned that, SEL is for everyone, how do you ensure that all children feel seen and represented in this type of work? And I bring this up because I think just in general, we talked about boys, but I think being emotional in society is sometimes seen as like a bad thing, even
Mm.
for like young girls, when people will say, oh, you're too emotional, it's always kind of a negative connotation. So how do you just ensure that like all of these children feel seen, represented, and validated in this type of work?
Well, let's take a step back, right? The first thing I think we all need to understand is that emotions are information. They give us information about ourselves, they give us information about the environment around them. What we do with our emotions matters. And so I assume when people say you're emotional or you're too emotional, right? What I think they probably mean is that your behavior is reflecting your feelings as opposed to your intent. So we can feel many things. We can feel happy, sad, disappointed, angry. We can feel um, elated. We can think about all the ways that we feel. How we manage those emotions, what we do with those feelings, how they drive our interactions. That's what we talk about when we talk about social emotional learning and to a certain extent emotional intelligence. Now, when we're talking to young people, one of the things that's really important is that everybody feels emotions. There's this idea that, especially for young people, that they're the only ones feeling the big emotions. Um, Everything from disappointment to elation. That they are the only ones who ever felt this. But in fact, we've all felt emotions, and as we mature in adults, we learn to express these emotions in ways that are constructive. So at the end of the day, the outcome of high quality SEL is constructive problem solving around inter and intrapersonal skill sets.
Now, SEL also leads to improved academic achievement, which I think is amazing because at the end of the day, that's like one of the biggest goals when you have students in school. You want them to achieve great things academically. Can you just expand on how this could be a game changer for so many Black and Brown communities?
I sure can. One of the key outcomes, again, of Dr. Christina Cipriano's study is that social and emotional learning is a key contributor to academic success. In fact, some research has demonstrated that social and emotional skill development is as important in terms of this, it contributed to academic success as interventions like tutoring and interventions that are based in teaching and learning and curriculum. Now, when we do this work, one of the things that we identified is the pathway between social emotional skills and academic success tends to be through things like self management, goal setting, personal responsibility, and decision making skills. That means that if we focus on teaching young people how to set and achieve goals and how to manage their emotions, how to take in information to make good decisions, they will do better on their academic outcomes. And that's amazing to me, right? Because I think sometimes we think that academic outcomes are almost always content based. How much knowledge do you know? How fast can you process information if we're thinking about IQ and something like that? But in fact, there are these other skills that really are predictive of academic outcomes. And in fact, there was a research study about 1993 by Dr. Catherine Wenzel, and she identified that you could predict graduation rates in 12th grade by looking at students' self management skills and social emotional skills in third grade. So, the takeaway here is that there are some foundational things that every child can learn. And it doesn't matter about your IQ, and it doesn't matter about how fast you read. You can learn how to set and achieve goals. You can learn how to manage your emotions. You can learn how to make good decisions. And if you learn those things, your academic outcomes will improve.
Now we have about a minute left, and I really want to know, how is SEL evolving to match the interests and goals of kids today? I hear so many people say, our kids are constantly changing. Are there any plans to evolve, or, what we have now, is this kind of like where we want to stay?
Well, we're always changing in the field of social and emotional learning. Some exciting things that are happening is there's now a social and emotional learning journal of policy, practice, and research. There is a new handbook of social and emotional learning coming out, and I'm happy to preview some of the cool things that are happening. One is that the field is really looking at the role of technology in social and emotional learning. And how to engage students digitally in different spaces to teach social and emotional skills. And then the other thing we're always looking at is how to integrate social and emotional skills more explicitly in academic spaces, as well as after school and post secondary spaces, so that young people can get SEL everywhere all the time because we know that it works.
All right, David, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. And I really enjoyed it because, as I mentioned, like students are always learning, and I don't think this was something that I was taught about in high school, or middle school or elementary school. And I'm so glad that it's being kind of like taught to children now. So, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this.
Thanks so much for having me.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. Where did the time go? Somehow I lost all those years. Where did the time go? I don't know how I got here. Or how did I get here?
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
We all know what it's like to feel alone. But it just takes one new connection.
Want to get out of here?
To empower many.
This is unbelievable.
It doesn't take a superhero to bring forces together. We all have the power to reach out
Let's go!
and help someone feel like they belong.
Pretty cool, huh?
We are stronger together.
Welcome back. The Melquain Jatelle Anderson Foundation is a multifaceted community organization dedicated to aiding gun violence victims and their families. MJAF actively engages in legislative and advocacy work at the city, state, and federal levels to promote laws empowering gun violence victims and survivors while striving for safer communities. Darren was able to sit down with the co-founder and chief communication officer for the MJAF, Xenia to talk about the work of the organization. Let's check it out.
I really want to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about this here because there's so many families that are impacted by gun violence daily. When we look at New York City and we see what's going on, there's so many people who are actually involved in families who really are struggling, and sometimes that resource isn't there. But you've done a great job in terms of providing resources for families who've actually been impacted.
Yes, we definitely have. When we started the Melquain Jatelle Anderson Foundation, it was after the death of my nephew. And everything that we went through, we just knew that we had to make sense of it, right? And we also wanted to make sure that we can support other families who may have been experiencing or try to prevent other families from experiencing some of the pain that we experience. So hence we came up with the Melquain Jatelle Anderson Foundation, fighting against gun violence via education, which really makes sure that survivors are available they have access to funds that are available to them. They have the knowledge and the resources of where to go, as well as ensuring that they have trauma coaching, some different types of wellness activities, just things to help them along the way. Because as you know, within our communities lately, it seems more as gun violence has become desensitized and it's almost like the norm, and we really want to disrupt that. So that's what we're all about. We're all about disrupting the hate within our communities and showing that we all deserve love and making sure that families know that they're not alone.
And when we talk about families being alone, walk us through an experience because you've had the unfortunate experience of having to deal with it with your own family. But as you had that experience, there were a lot of places of darkness and a lot of lack of access to resources. What was it that was going on during the time after your loved one's death that you really just needed a helping hand with?
It was more so because we were all going through it. So when everyone that you would normally go to is experiencing the same pain, who do you lean on? Like, who's your go-to person? Who is your circle of healing and support? And experiencing that, it was like a real light bulb going off of, wow, if we are experiencing this, how many other families within our community were experiencing something similar? You know, Melquain was not the first person in the community to lose his life to gun violence. However, it was the first time that we had that intimate connection to it. Now, we have always been pillars in our community. We have always helped out with others in our community, but this was the first time we had firsthand access and knowledge to what someone goes through when they lose someone to gun violence. And that right there was so detrimental to the entire family. Like, it shook us. We all was having our own little mental breakdowns simultaneously. So it's like, I can't lean on my sister because my sister is breaking down. My other sister couldn't lean on me because I was breaking down. My niece and my son couldn't lean on us because they were like, everybody was breaking down. Yet we were all trying to seem strong for the other. So having someone like myself, like a trauma coach that can talk to the families, help them navigate through those emotions, thoughts, and feelings, would have been extremely helpful if my family would have had that.
Right. And so here you are providing help. But not only do you provide help, you provide emergency resources and also scholarships. Share with our viewers a little bit about how you've been able to transcend your pain into purpose.
Sure. I'm glad you asked that. So, like I said, we do. Not only do we do scholarships, we also do emergency funds. So our scholarships are for students who are either graduating from college, graduating from high school, going into college, or someone who is in college with a GPA with a 2.0 or under. And the reason why we specifically wanted to make sure it was a 2.0 or under, because there's so many layers that plays into why someone's grades are slipping, and that's overlooked. It's overshadowed by everyone wanting to give money or give funds to those scholars who have academic success. But you don't realize how some of those scholars' grade slips due to experience of trauma. Their grades slipped to having to work several jobs to make ends meet, not having funds to get their laptops or their cell phone. Now everybody do their work on their cell phone, their cell phones fixed. So there's so many different things that play into why a person grades slip. And we wanted to make sure that we was providing a lending hand to those scholars, as well as the emergency fund. The emergency fund there is so should something like that happen and you need funds for to get meals, or you need funds to fix your laptop so that you can get your papers done, or you need to pay your electric bill so that you can have lights so that you can see and get your work done. The Melquain Jatelle Anderson Foundation likes to be there to lend that helping hand, even if it's only $100 at the time, whether it's $500 at a time, whatever it is, as long as we can give you some sense of hope so that you can continue on your journey to being the best version of yourself, that's what we're here for.
Xenia, when we talk about young people, I think you talked about something that was, very important. You talked about them being in class and going to school, and maybe they had a loved one that passed away due to gun violence, a family member, or they've experienced shots fired in their own community. I think there's this
Mm-hmm.
automatic assumption that kids just go back to school, everything's good, I'm going to learn, I'm going to do that. But you kind of touched about that, right? You talked about how when we look at our young people, sometimes there's some other mitigating factors for a less than 2.0 average, and you want to encourage that. Give us some more insight into that, because I think we don't always pay enough attention to that. We have expectations of our young people when they go to school, but sometimes we don't know about the societal factors such as the trauma, such as the emotional impact of just witnessing or hearing or knowing that a family member suffered some sort of gun violence.
That I'm so happy that you are creating space for us to discuss that, because it's so important to recognize that trauma shows up in so many different ways. It can show up in silence. It can show up in acting out. It can show up in grade slipping. It can show up, like I said, in so many different. It's just multifaceted, right? And I think when children go back to school, whether you are in middle school, elementary, all the way to your collegiate years, when you go back to school and you're in the classroom setting and you're trying to focus and trying to get that work done, but you have this trauma that's sitting on your shoulder, this weight that's weighing you down, and the other person in the classroom doesn't know that that's what you're experiencing. So they're just figuring you're tuning out, right? And so they automatically dismiss the trauma that you bring with you that you can't shed. And that is what the Melquain Jatelle Anderson Foundation is about. It's about disrupting that, because if we do not address that trauma, then we're creating or we're contributing to the generational cycle of cultural betrayal. We're contributing to the generational cycle of more violence. We're contributing to the generational cycle of our kids failing in the school system because they can't focus. And we're contributing to the factor that we're creating violent spaces within the classroom because we're not healing or helping to assist to heal the entire child. We're just focusing on the curriculum, which I can't focus on the curriculum when I just lost my brother. I can't focus on the curriculum when a friend that was sitting in the classroom with me last week is no longer here because he lost his life or she lost her life to gun violence. We forget about what that does to the individual, and not everyone has the capability to just turn it off and switch and move on right away. And unless you experience that trauma firsthand, it's difficult to understand how long that process takes. Grief has no time limit. And whether you can be grieving today or you grieving 26 years later, grief has no time limit and it affects everyone differently.
Yeah. When I talk about this, I talk about this from a perspective of understanding what families have gone through. I know so many families have been impacted by gun violence that uh, trying to just get life back in order is a long and an arduous process. I want to spend a couple of seconds talking about another capacity of your work, and that's the advocacy component. Because in addition to providing for families, you also are a voice for the voiceless in that area because you're providing advocacy for legislatively to allow legislative officials to know about gun violence victims. Share with us a little bit about the legislative advocacy that you're doing.
I'm sure currently we are in a process of fighting to get Mel's Law, which is named after my nephew, Mel's Law Pass, which will require universities and all collegiate institutes to provide the passing family member with their family members with a posthumous degree, which means that no matter, as long as they were in good academic standard, their family can receive their degree. They will be waiving the 90 credits that you're supposed to have in order to receive it. It's too late for my nephew. However, we just want to make sure that families have an opportunity to receive more than just a death certificate. Because if that person was still here, they would continue on a journey and they would be able to graduate. So that's one of the things that we have going, which is Mel's Law. It's already been passed in the House and the Senate. Fingers crossed right now. We're just waiting for Governor Hochul to sign it into law. Also, we're partnering with Crimes Victim Services to ensure that the Fair Access Act is passed, and that just means that they will be increasing the amount of funds and services that victims receive after the passing of the loved one. It also will diminish the requirements for police reporting after a violence, because we know in our communities, well, in the Black and Brown communities, people have not always had the best relationship with police officers, and it's often, I won't say always, but often been a cycle of re-victimization. And we want to make sure that we're disrupting that as well. There's so much more. There's advocating for our seniors and fair access for our seniors to make sure that they are not feeling overwhelmed by housing and the things that they have going on with them, where it's like if some of our seniors only have their grandchildren who are able to take care of them, and when their grandchildren are get mixed up in something, and or if they have friends who are engaged in any type of activities, then housing wants to remove them from their homes. And we want to make sure that we are advocating for our seniors because our seniors pave our way, right? And so we want to make sure that they are not being re-victimized and being forced out of their homes. So there's a lot of advocacy that we do that falls under our belt, and we're going to continue to do it. In the midst of our pain, while we are still healing, we are also healing by helping.
Yeah. And so for people who want to connect with you and get access to some of these services and know about some of the legislative efforts that you're undertaking, how do they go about doing that?
So they can go to our website, which is mjascholarships.org. They can also connect with me on social media, which is Coach Barnes GMT _ if they can also send an email to xbonds@themjf.org. Those are all ways that you can get in contact with us. We are here. Please don't feel like you're alone. We want to help. We want you to feel valued, seen, and heard because you are our community, and we all deserve to be loved and to heal through our process.
Yeah, the process is long, and I think you talked about that in the opening that so many times we put a time frame on people, but even for
Mhm.
yourself right now, there are triggers and there's moments when you still have to relive and reenact. And I know when you're helping somebody out, knowing that you've had this experience firsthand yourself, it's got to bring back some thoughts and memories for you.
It definitely does, and so we make sure we do step backs within our organization so that we can come together. And we have something called Silence is Loud, which is a virtual Zoom we do the fourth Sunday of every month, so that we can create a space that people can come and vent and just talk and process together. Because when you're trying to go through that by yourself, it's just so difficult. And it's you really need to know that you have someone else who can understand and empathize with what you're going through. Because, like I said, if you haven't experienced it firsthand, it's difficult to understand what someone is going through. Often people will say, like, you got to move on. They wouldn't want you to feel this way, but you don't know how it feels until it's you. And we don't want others to know, right? We really don't want others to know how it feels. We want to be able to stop people from getting to that aspect. And we know that it's difficult because we have illegal guns on the street that are being funneled into our communities, right? And we're still fighting against that, going to the White House and trying to get them to put more legislation that disrupt ghost guns and trafficking of guns into our communities, and that's a work in progress. But it's just difficult. And just even piggyback into what you're saying about the schools, I think about what my own experience with my son was away in college, and the first thing I thought about was like, hey, let's just get him off and out of the community, because as long as he's here, he's gonna be thinking about what happened. And I didn't think about the support that he really needed in shipping him away so far from the family. And from that instant, he had a breakdown, lost his full scholarship to college, and he had a football scholarship as well as an academic scholarship, and we had to bring him home and get him the help that he needed. And that was unfortunate because, like I said, we were all going through grieving and silos, but simultaneously. And so that was a missed opportunity to get him the help that he needed before he went.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. But congratulations on the work that you're doing. I think that it's so critical that people have access to resources. And as you said, you don't want anybody to go through the experience that you've experienced. However, if they do, you have somebody that's quote unquote been there, done that, and got a T-shirt and can really help to put a covering over somebody else who's actually had that experience as well. Before we leave again, let's get the information out there for our viewers as to how they can get in contact with you.
Sure, they can get in contact me through our website, which is MJA at scholarship at I'm sorry, mjascholarship.org, as well as social media, which is Coach Bonds GMT underscore. Don't be afraid. Also, I have some books on Amazon called Grieving to Heal, the Shadowboying Experiences, and it helps you navigate through your grief, as well as the Recondition, Learning to Love Yourself Through the Trauma. These books were written specifically to help people navigate through their group, especially victims of trauma and gun violence.
Well, Xenia, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Sorry I botched up your name in the beginning, but I got it now, girl. Xenia Barnes with us here, and she is doing a wonderful work, and we thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forum.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before we leave, let me not forget. We also have the Sky. We also have The Sky Has Caring Eyes by Michelle Barnes Anderson. It is a book that teaches toddlers how to process grief as well. But it's done in such a kid-friendly way that that families can really not make it morbid, but let them know that their loved one is still and will always be with them.
All right. Well, thank you, Xenia. We got to leave it there, but thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums. And want our viewers to know, stay with us. We'll be right back right after this.
Is it time yet?
It's time.
But it's not time for dinner.
Oh, turn it back.
Faster dinner!
Donating pet food is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
Most hiring algorithms would scream me out.
Some bosses couldn't see me as a leader.
I've run this place for 20 years, but I still need to prove that I'm more than what you see on paper.
I've been running code as long as I've been able to reach a keyboard.
This is what I do. It's second nature for me, coordinating 100 details at once.
It's the way my mind works. I have a very mechanical brain.
I sold them on my skills.
You gotta be so good they can't ignore you.
My magic is
analytics and empathy. That's how I'm getting clients. You have to have the confidence in yourself to show up and defy the odds.
I'm more than who I am on paper.
I never got a college degree. And today, I'm the CEO of my own company. People want to tell me I'm one in a million, when actually I'm one of millions. Stars are all around us. It's time for them to shine.
Welcome back. Recently, data from the Association of American Medical Colleges reveals just 5.7% of U.S. doctors are Black, a figure that has only marginally improved over the past 120 years. This persistent underrepresentation underscores the urgency of diversifying the healthcare workforce. Unfortunately, obstacles for students of color arise as early as elementary school, where limited exposure to and participation in science can erode interest in pursuing a medical career. Joining us to tell their point of view on the matter is Chief Executive Officer of the Ashe Institute for Urban Health, Dr. Marilyn Fraser. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. It's wonderful being here with you.
And I just want to make sure, is Ashe, is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes, it's Arthur Ashe Institute. It was founded by Arthur Ashe just before he passed away.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that. I wanted to make sure I was saying it right. Now, can you elaborate on the historical exclusion of Black individuals from the medical field and how it has contributed to basically what we're seeing now with the underrepresentation of Black doctors in the United States?
So it's interesting. I listened to a talk about a couple weeks ago, and they were just talking about historically how Blacks were excluded from the healthcare workforce, and that was intentional in terms of even having medical schools where Blacks can go. We started out years ago having 14 medical schools that were focused on admitting Black applicants, and that went down from 14 to 5 and then to 2. And right now we have 4 medical schools that are focused on that. But historically, Blacks have been disenfranchised and has been removed from the healthcare workforce, either by not having medical schools where they can go, or even when they're going to medical schools, things were so difficult and there were a lot of roadblocks that have been put in place. Unfortunately, we have not come much closer to where we were years ago. We still have, as you mentioned, just 5.7% of Black doctors. And when we look at Black males, we even have less. And we need to do more about that to make sure that we're intentional about recruiting Blacks. We are training them, making sure that they have training post their medical education so that they can specialize and be well equipped to perform as doctors.
Now, what are the potential consequences of this underrepresentation, particularly in addressing health disparities in communities of color?
So one of the potential impacts of not having enough people of color in the health professions is a reduction in quality care. We know that people like to go to doctors that look like them, like to have health professionals that look like them, and they do better in those settings. Studies have shown that if you are a Black person and you go to a Black doctor, that your health outcomes are better than if you went to a doctor that was not. Just because of culture, just because of people relating to people that may understand them better, it's important that we diversify the healthcare workforce.
And I also want to add to that, I could imagine that being super important just because I know for a lot of people, like going to the doctor and they tell you, you have to eat these certain foods, but like if nobody in your family eats those foods, I could imagine that's really challenging.
Exactly, exactly. When you go to the doctor and they tell you that, okay, you need to have your plate should look a certain way, and we look at the food plate that we see that's naturally shown, and for some people, they don't relate to those things. I mean, for Caribbean people, for instance, they may not have the rice and the steak and the vegetables that way. They may have some ground provisions, root vegetables, or they may have saltfish instead of fish. You know, those different kinds of things are important. And also it's important that they're role models that look like you. If you aspire to be a doctor, it's wonderful to know that there are doctors that have gone that path before, and that you can follow in that path. So it's not, it's more than just a health piece. It's also about having role models and having people know, and children, young people know that they can attain certain things because there are people that have gone that path before, and those people look like them.
Now, speaking of children, how do early educational disparities and limited access to science education resources affect the interest and preparedness of students from racially and ethnically diverse backgrounds to pursue careers in STEM or medicine?
So, in preparing students for STEM or medicine, it's important early on that we are exposed to those things, that we are exposed to the sciences, we're exposed to anatomy or physiology, and we're exposed to those things that may pique our interest in the health professions. And if we are in schools that may be under resourced, that may not have those equipment, may not have simulations, may not have the technology or any of the resources that are needed to help our students pique their interest, so to speak, it's hard because they're starting way behind their counterparts that may have better resources, that may be in well-resourced schools, that may be in communities where you have those opportunities that our students may not otherwise have. So it's important that those schools are resourced and that policies are in place to make sure that our students are prepared, and our students are starting on somewhat of an equal or equitable footing, so to speak.
Now, I also want to talk about the exposure. You kind of talked about it a little bit, but why is that important? And then also, there are a lot of Black students and students of color who are interested in these fields, but feel intimidated sometimes, or sometimes they can't keep up. I know I had a friend who, when she was in college, she had to do a lot of tutoring just to kind of like match her peers who were already learning what she's learning now in middle school and high school. So can you talk about that challenge for the students who do have that interest?
Yeah, I think the challenge is the exposure for us to make sure that the students that have the interest are equipped to perform well. I think our students are not less educated, they're not less intelligent than others, but making sure that they are aware of the things that are out there and opportunities for them to pursue that, and make more opportunities available, because right now we have some, but I think we can do so much better within our schools. And as you mentioned, there are students that may not even know how to study. Right. One of the things that our Health Science Academy has done, in addition to giving students some science education and making sure that they learn about anatomy and physiology, there are those soft skills in terms of how best do I study, what environments are better for me in terms of studying, what are my study skills and what are my study styles, and so on, so that those things help a student to be prepared and help them to be successful when they go through school as well. When we talk about a historical reference, a reference that was brought up to me was about when schools started to be integrated, when medical schools started being integrated, and to kind of fulfill a quota, some schools would admit one student of color. and another school would say, okay, you know what, I'll admit another student so that they can have a study buddy, or they can have somebody else they can talk to, because in those systems where that post segregation, in those the initial systems, people were isolated, and so you cannot do as well when you're isolated, when you feel as though you're the only one working to achieve a goal, and you do not have that peer support, you do not have mentoring. And oftentimes, even now, our students feel isolated because they may be the only ones that may be interested in a certain profession, but they do not have the folks with them to help them to navigate that along the way. So so mentoring is also important, and having folks that are like you, that are like-minded, that you can work together.
Now, I'm really glad that you brought that up because that wasn't something that I ever thought about. I'm curious to know now, we talked about how, there aren't many black physicians. Do you feel isolated even now? Like, you've done the work, but now that practicing is, does that isolation stay with you, considering that we don't have that many black doctors and well, I will stick with black doctors for now. Do you feel that sense of isolation still?
I think that there is a, for me, I don't, because I'm in a community setting, and I'm in a setting where like I have like-minded folks around. I have faculty members that I could communicate with and so on, and I'm not practicing. But I've had folks that I know, and other physicians that feel isolated because when they're going into residency, they may be the only Black or the person of color there, and sometimes it the racism that you feel, it's still there, and so those things cause people to feel isolated when they're going through their postgraduate work, especially when they're doing residency or they're doing a fellowship. Sometimes the discrimination is so much that people do feel isolated, even though they're past that trajectory of high school and college or medical school and so on.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that because that definitely just came to me. And we don't talk about like how that affects, the physician, like sometimes you have to advocate maybe a little bit more for patients because of this background knowledge. That was something that I, like having this conversation made me think about. So thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Now, we talked about it like on an individual level, but could you discuss the public health implications of the shortage of Black physicians and the disparities in healthcare outcomes for patients of color, more like on a community level?
Yes, so on a community level, the same issues exist where if you do not have physicians of color, you do not have people that patients may listen to as much in terms of their care, and feel as though their physicians and healthcare providers are working with them to better their care, then you have what we see with a lot of people not having access to care, not a lot of people not accessing medical care, even if it's available, because sometimes they just cannot relate to their doctors. And something that's important also to state is it's not just because a doctor is a person of color that they will be relatable to a patient of color, because there are all other issues that play into that too, whether it's culture, whether it's class, whether it's some sexism, gender issues. Those things are in there as well and make it even more complicated. But on a public health basis, it's important that we have more physicians of color, that the entire healthcare workforce is diversified. So different views, different cultures can come in to make it richer, make it more effective in terms of treating patients across the board.
Now, you touched on it just a little bit earlier before, but can you discuss the role of educational initiatives like the Health Science Academy in not only increasing representation, but also promoting diversity at all levels of healthcare in the workforce?
Oh yeah, so when our students, or generally our health science academy is divided into different portions. So we have a middle school component where we go into the schools, and the sixth graders, they have general health sciences. The seventh graders get sports medicine. The eighth graders get forensic sciences. And then we have a ninth grade bridge program that exposes students to the 3-year after school program that we have, which is our academy. And that program goes from 10th through 12th grades. And so those students come to SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University. They get exposed to anatomy, physiology, and some of the soft skills that I mentioned. And so they are equipped and they're prepared for the health sciences. When they come into Downstate, when they come to us at the Institute, they think of health careers as nursing and medicine. And those are the only two they think about. But when they come to us, they get exposed to the other schools that are at Downstate. So they get exposed to the School of Public Health. They get exposed to allied health or physical therapy, occupational therapy. They get exposed to graduate studies so that if they want to do research, they know that that's a path as well. So it exposes them to a diverse array of professions within health, as opposed to just medicine and nursing. So it's a wonderful tool and a wonderful opportunity for our students to be able to participate in the academy, get exposed to those different careers, but also be equipped, understanding health disparities exist, understanding health inequities, and how they can advocate for themselves, because oftentimes students are not able to do that.
And what are some strategies the organization uses to help motivate these students? And can you talk a little bit about the mentorship aspect of it?
Oh yes, definitely. So one of the strategies to motivate our students come with an interest already in health. So when they see simulations, for instance, that's something else that's different that they wouldn't get in their schools. Our students partner with community-based organizations to do research. They present their research findings in a poster that would look uh, better probably than an undergraduate poster oftentimes, and they present those findings in poster sessions. They start thinking about policy and policy implications for the work that they will do. And so they get to what they get in the academy really helps them to be prepared. Also, with the academy, they're often taught by students, medical students, or students from the other schools. So these students are not very far removed from them, and they serve as mentors, and they serve as folks that they can look up to and to aspire to do those same things one day. So the mentoring is something that's continuous. They get mentored by the people that work with them. They come back to us. We follow them up when they go into college, and we have an alumni coordinator that follows our students. So they get a lot of mentoring that we are really happy that they have that opportunity to do.
Well, Doctor, I want to thank you so much for joining us and have this really important conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just encourage everyone to visit the Institute's website at www.arthurasheinstitute.org. Our annual fundraiser is coming up in a couple of, almost a month. And so we encourage people to just visit our website. And if you need to donate to the Institute, you can do that there as well. So thank you so much.
Of course. We've come to the end of our show today. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. To rewatch this week's edition, you can catch the recable cast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your point of view, you can visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week as we continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm Kibin and Alleyne. Take care.